Hello, brothers and sisters, and welcome to day 70 of the Chronological Read Through the Bible. Today's reading and commentary comes from Numbers chapter 34 through 36, and this wraps up the book of Numbers for us. So tomorrow we head into the book of Deuteronomy. Now, here at the tail end of the book of Numbers, we're going to have the tribes given their specific areas which they're going to be dwelling in the promised land. But more significantly, it's pointed out the cities which the Levitical priest will have. And 6 of those cities being cities of refuge. So I want to focus on this city of refuge just a little bit. And it's one of these things that, wow, it could really be unpacked in a little over an hour. Would just barely start really touching the surface of it. But what a blessing that the Lord provided this place that one could flee to. This city that if you were falsely accused, or even if it was an accidental murder, which we would consider manslaughter today, one could flee to this city to await the judgment to come forth as to whether you were guilty or not guilty, and whether this would end up resulting in the death penalty, or whether it would end up with you being imprisoned or house arrest. To a certain extent, you may have noticed that even when the person was found that they weren't going to be put to death, they could then stay in the city, but were not allowed to leave the city. If they left the city, they could then be pursued by the manslayer or the family member that had been appointed to go forth and right this wrong. Sort of be the eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth deal of justice here. So you had to remain in the city until the high priest died. And then once a high priest died, then you were basically considered innocent and you could leave. Now, I think that's really interesting. And again, one of these things that you could really talk about a number of different possibilities as to why it was laid out for when the high priest died. I think you could maybe even say a part of it was because the high priest is like taking on those sins of the people in a way. And once he died, then that sin died with him. I'm not saying the high priest bore the sins for the people, but it had to have something to do with the sacrifice that he was making for the people. I would think, if I was really to dig and dive into this a little deeper. I just want to say here we're going to see as Numbers is closing out, even by the time we get to chapter 36, where it's basically speaking of inheritance which would come through marriage. The Lord is hitting so many details that a lot of times people don't really realize that it's even in the Bible. They miss that these details exist in the scriptures. They don't realize really how so many of our even legal procedures today came from the Old Testament scriptures, or just came out of the Bible. Even down to the point of when one would be executed, it states that the family members were to be present, which is still something that takes place today. Now, I know there's many different opinions on people being executed, especially in the U.S. this day and age. I don't want to fully dive into that other than to say the scriptures were very clear with how many witnesses there had to be. It wasn't based on evidence, of course. They didn't have their CSI team out there combing the scene for DNA or a hair strand here or a fingerprint there. It was based on eyewitness accounts. And if that eyewitness bore a false testimony, they could be put to death. So better believe it that if you were an eyewitness to a crime or to a person's innocence, you testified straightforward, this man's innocent, or this man committed it, I saw him. And it wouldn't really have been some of the pressure that maybe one would feel today, like, well, if I really say what happened, somebody might come after me. Well, it didn't matter if you didn't say what really happened, and others could say, well, no, we know he was there. We know he saw what happened. You could then be put to death anyway. So that alleviated, I'm not saying our justice system needs to work that way today. I'm just saying that was why it worked as well as it did at that time. I wish, and I'm sure some legal folks would love to see this. For a number of years, I worked in the court system, and I always loved watching trials unfold, and I would really love to have seen how their legal system really worked. The only time we really see their legal system in full motion is at the trial of Christ, and the leaders are breaking a multitude of rules at that time, their own rules and biblical rules. And so, that can't be the example, but I know as soon as I say I'd love to see it, how trials worked back then, I know people would point to that, but that trial did not function as it should have or was supposed to. It was illegal. So, anyway, I find this to be always real interesting, these cities of refuge, the city which one could escape to. This family member who is to come forth and right this wrong and really track down the person responsible, he has some very similar responsibilities to the kinsman redeemer, and in many cases would have even been that same person. But what a responsibility put on you is that if one of your family members is murdered, you're to then track down the murderer and murder them, or kill them, I guess. But anyway, it's just interesting to see how it unfolds. As I say, I really wish, I don't even feel like my little brief commentary here today is doing this justice, because there is so much more to be said for how this unfolds. I just have always thought how awesome it is that God provided this way to protect the innocent, or to protect those who weren't deserving of execution. An accidental murder is one thing, or an accidental death, I should rather say, because murder is premeditated. And I realize that even though there could be the aspect of, two people on a work site and they start arguing, and one picks up a board and hits the other one on the head and kills him. Well, these things need to go to trial. They need to be before a judge, and they need to go before, or the witnesses of that incident need to come forth as well. Well, brothers and sisters, I know that not to turn into law and order here. It's just, as I say, it's always been an intriguing part to me. Anyway, I hope you've had a good day. Until tomorrow, God bless.